Give it one more minute to do the poll, and I'm just actually going to briefly. So can you guys see the poll, or do I just see that?
Yeah,
it was up for a second.
Yes.
It was up for a second? Okay.
Well, see it now. Hopefully everyone can see it
now.
Awesome.
Okay, so just to briefly summarize, so about half of the people who had completed the poll at that point identify as having experience of mental illness. Some mental health clinicians, other clinicians, peer specialists, caregivers, community health workers, and navigators. All right, and we'll keep going with that throughout. I just want to briefly welcome you guys. Can you see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah? All right, great. So welcome. We're really glad you're here. I'm going to turn over to Carrie in just a second. But as we start, I just wanted to take a minute to center ourselves in the multiple roles that we have. This is Susan Sontag. And as she wrote, everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use only the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged to identify ourselves as citizens of that other place. And so with that spirit, the words that we use matter, and we want to use words that we can all relate to as people with all of these diverse experiences. That is my introduction, and thank you for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here. Great to see all of you, some familiar faces, some unfamiliar. And this morning, what we wanted to do was just start off with a little self-compassion exercise to provide some grounding, to arrive together, and also hopefully a tool for some of you on the call who identify as caregivers in various contexts. It's something that you can actually use in the moment, on the spot. So if you want to close your eyes and get comfortable, I know some folks feel more comfortable turning their camera off. Please feel free to do that. And we'll get started. Okay, so let's just start by taking a couple of deep cleansing breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, and give yourself permission to just be here in this moment. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to tend to. And I'm going to introduce this self-compassion break to you now. And it's designed to bring in some tenderness, some loving, connected presence when you're hurting or struggling in some way. So I want you to think of a situation in your life where you are in some need of care. Maybe you're feeling inadequate in some way. Maybe you're feeling badly about a failure or mistake that you've made, or something about yourself you don't like, something that's difficult, stressful, or challenging. Allow yourself to feel your way into the situation. What's going on? What are you feeling? And in addition to the emotions you might be able to name, try to locate the distress in your body if you can. So dropping out of your head for a moment and into your body. And now we're going to bring in 3 components of self-compassion, starting with mindfulness. So mindfulness, when it comes to self-compassion, is bringing in a sort of tender acceptance, really being present with what is, and validating the pain or distress you might be feeling. You might say something to yourself, such as, "This is really hard to feel this. This moment is painful. It's a moment of suffering." And also, while doing this, reminding yourself of your humanity, that feelings like this, situations like this, is part of being human. There is nothing wrong with me for feeling this way. and I'm certainly not alone. Really allowing yourself to feel your connectedness to others in your own imperfection. Lastly, we want to bring in some kindness in this moment. One way to do this is with physical touch. So you might place your hands over your heart. You might cradle your face with your hands, feeling the warmth of your hands, or gently folding them in your lap and saying something to yourself, which is exactly what you need to hear in this moment. Maybe it's a message of acceptance. It's okay to be imperfect, or a message of support. You know, I'm here for you. It will be okay. If you aren't sure what to say, you might imagine what you'd say to a dear friend who's going through something similar. Now, letting this practice go, but allowing yourself to be exactly as you are in this moment. And if you're feeling any distress, you can always try grounding with your feet on the floor, kind of rocking heel to toe, feeling those soles of your feet, feeling that stability, and maybe a little gratitude for those feet that hold you up all day, doing the important work you do. You guys can turn your cameras back on when you're ready, or take a moment. And thank you for joining me in that.
Thank you, Carrie, for leading us in that. That was really wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
So next, we are excited to have a panel to learn from two really intelligent, interesting caregivers with diverse experiences who, you know, Amy and I have had the privilege of learning from and working with this year. We wanted to take the time to reflect together that people who are caregivers are filling different roles. It may be for a short time, it may be for a long time. It may be your loved one or partner or family member. It may be the peers you care for or the housemates you care for. It may be about your past experiences and your current experiences now, and wanted to give the opportunity to have a conversation with two caregivers today. So maybe we'll ask other folks to turn their videos off so we can just have the folks on the panel have their videos on if they're comfortable, and we can still participate in the chat. And I'm gonna, so we have Amy Sika, who is the Director of Recovery Services at Riverside, who's also collaborated with me to run an awesome group of residents affected by mental illness. And we have Andre Wynn, who is a long-term caregiver, who's going to share his story of caring for his partner. And we wanted to start it off with you, Amy, sharing a bit about your experiences.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. So like Kelly said, my name is Amy Sika, and I have past personal experiences as a caregiver. And then also it comes into play with the work that I do. I'm going to start with the personal piece, and I'm also going to time myself because I know I can talk forever. So back in 2014, my mom, she wasn't feeling well for a very long time. My mom did live with co-occurring challenges with mental health and alcohol misuse. And it's kind of one of those things for a very long time. I didn't know who to blame. I wanted to blame somebody, right? And I still probably will never have those answers, and that's okay. But because of her specific and unique challenges, for whatever reason, she didn't get the care that she needed when she needed. It only started to come when things got really, really bad. So she was diagnosed with lung and bone cancer. We got the diagnosis within the first week of January of 2014. And she passed away on January 22nd of 2014. So my caregiving experience was very short. I was the mom of two young kids trying to do the balance of taking care of them and making sure they're okay. My grandmother was still alive at the time. She was, 94. She was a nurse at Mass General her entire life. So she knew everything when we would talk about it, and she kind of helped guide us along the process. But it was tough. I live with my own mental health challenges, especially around anxiety, and to be able to see your rock just, not be there anymore. It was a really challenging time. And so then when she passed away, it was just my grandmother left. And it was like, okay, now we need to make sure that Nana's all right. And it was, again, all hands on deck, being a mom, two little kids, dropping off dinners every day, having her get up, having her get around. She ended up passing away 4 months and 2 days after my mother passed. And I believe with all of my heart that she passed away of a broken heart. She was in perfect health beforehand. I believe her, everything that she knew of nursing, she knew what she wanted and needed. And I supported that. She wanted to be with her husband, who also passed of cancer, her son who passed of cancer, and my mom. Mm-hmm. But it was such a unique experience on my end of, how do I do this balance? How do I take care of my own mental health while processing all of this? I always share how I used to lock myself away and hide when I would cry, because I wanted to protect my kids, right? They were, I think, 4 and 2 at the time. And the most turning point of my life at that time was realizing I didn't have to hide that. And I felt this pressure, right, of having to be perfect and be this strong person. But it was the moment I realized that I could share my emotions with other people and that was okay, that I was able to start healing. And I was able to model, not just for my children, but for the people around me, that like emotions are real and they're valid, and holding them in for me didn't help, right? And that's when I was able to get the support that I needed. I was excited to see that in the poll. I believe we have 40% of people here that are certified peer specialists, but I do want to just kind of touch on what that is and what we do. So a certified peer specialist is someone who uses their own personal lived experience to be able to support others. So as I don't do as much direct care work anymore in my current role, but peer specialists as a whole, we use our lived experience and that mutuality to be able to support people in their process of recovery, with whatever that looks like. It is incredibly self-defined. We now know that recovery isn't linear, right? And there are numerous pathways to be able to get to the life that you want. It's amazing to be able to see the shift within services, to see that the best expert is the person themselves. And that's where peers can be so incredible of advocating for that and really showing that the power in individuals, even if they're going through a really challenging time. And that could be with mental health, that could be medical, that could be both of them combined. It is probably one of the most rewarding things I have ever been able to do in my life. And the feeling of being able to sit next to someone when they're maybe having some challenges and just say like, I get it. And you can just see people's eyes light up, to know that they're not alone, to know that there's hope, to know that there's other people who have walked this journey and that are doing kind of all right in life now, right? And that's what it's all about. So I am beyond grateful. I think back to my mom and my grandmother, and it's one of those things of like, wow, I wish they could see what I'm doing now. But I know that they can, right? And I am incredibly grateful for that. And I know every single day that I make them proud. And, whether it's for them or for me or for every single person I support, that's why I'm here every single day. And with that, I will say thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I was really struck by what you said about how like showing our children and other people in our lives that we feel things, and that makes us human and okay and real. It brings me back to what Carrie was saying. So I really appreciated you sharing that. Andre, we want to invite you to share your story as a caregiver too.
Sure. My name is Andre. I have a partner who is currently ill and has been for 20 years. I've been doing this for about 20 years now in terms of being his caregiver. He has an inordinate amount of problems that he's going through. Not necessarily to list them all, but one of them is cancer. prior to the cancer, he had very many issues medically that we seem to be able to get through over the past 20 years. It has its ebbs and flows. There were periods where he was okay and he was able to go out with me. He's not ambulatory, but I would take him out every day. Every weekend to the movies or to the theater or to dinner. So in the earlier years, it was a little better, and it's progressing now over these last 20 years to the point where now he's recently was diagnosed with cancer. And for me, my relationship with Kevin is one of privilege on my part to know him. Kevin's had an incredible life, even though his initial entree into being ill, physically ill anyway, was because of his drug use. And I sort of know what the guidelines and protocols are for when someone is put, say, in a safe home given to them by the state because they don't have enough money or because they have a mental illness and dual diagnosis. So he was in a program like that at the Central YMCA in Cambridge. And he wasn't living with me. This is initially, he wasn't living with me. He was living on his own, but he was still having these drug problems. So I would try to communicate with Kevin every single day just to make sure that he was okay. And I didn't hear from him one day. And I didn't hear from him the next day, which was unusual. Even in the throes of his drug addiction, he would always answer the telephone. So I called the front desk at the YMCA. And the YMCA says to me, well, I can't even tell you that he's here. I says, what do you mean? I know that he's there because he's in a program there and he's told me that he's there. And I even have his room number. Could you please go check on Kevin to see whether or not he's okay because he's not responding? And the individual wasn't being dismissive as much as he was trying to follow protocol, because my name was not on the list for me to be given information about Kevin. And I kept pressing him to check on Kevin because I was worried. And he chose not to. I even asked him to, well, you don't have to let me know that he's okay, but you can go in and check on him and you don't have to call me back just to see if he's okay. And they chose not to do that either. The next morning, they found Kevin on the floor in a seizure. He had been down for maybe 12 hours. And that started the journey into where we are today. He had to go into the hospital and he's never gotten out. He went from the hospital to Spalding to the nursing facility, Sherrill House. And that's how it all began. And I was angry about the protocol that your industry has in place about not being able to reveal any information about a patient unless that patient has your name signed down. But to me, I looked at it as being just common sense. I understand that there's protocols and guidelines, but common sense would tell me, okay, this guy is worried about his partner, and I can at least go and check in on him to see if he's okay. But he didn't do that. And as I said, that's where we are today. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster with Kevin for me for the last 20 years. As I said, there's been ebbs and flows in his health. I don't know how to manage it. You know, I was in therapy myself. I went to therapy myself many years ago, and I was in therapy for about 10, 11 years. And the impetus for me to go there was for me to try to find a way not to have so much anxiety over Kevin. And so I did a little research. I spoke a little bit earlier before you all came on board. I've always read the DSM, and because I've always been interested in mental health. and trying to figure out what's going on with me and trying to self-diagnose myself, which is very difficult to do with mental health, unlike other physiology type of problems that people have. Those I can read up on and clearly understand it because of my education in biochemistry and physiology in college. But I had a big concern about myself. I was having anxiety, and the anxiety comes from not knowing, if that makes sense, not knowing what's going to happen with Kevin. How serious is it with Kevin? And doctors, there's nothing intentional. Doctors are not always able to give you definitive answers. You know, I used to laugh and joke with that. They only give you enough information just to make you worried, never say anything definitive to you. And having a background educationally in the sciences, I clearly understand that medicine is not an exact science, and that's why they call it a medical practice. But even with all of that understanding of it intellectually, I couldn't emotionally get away from not having the answers. You know, mathematics was very important to me in studying that in undergrad school. And, you know, it's a very absolute type of science. And I'm also an individual who's absolute. I took the science courses because they allowed me to give me definitive responses and answers. And with this sickness and illness are just emotions in life with people. It's not always that black and white. It oftentimes isn't that black and white with when you're dealing with human beings and when you're dealing with your own emotions. And I think for me, I swung the pendulum far to the areas of having a lifestyle and an emotion and compartmentalizing on that which I can control or create an environment in which I can control. And that way I can flourish. I was derailed because I was no longer the Andre that I knew, the paragon of rectitude and strength, and able to do all these things and have all the answers. And all of my friends and all of my family members and acquaintances would always come to me for advice, and I would always give it. Not that I would ask for it, but that became who I was. And people have a tendency to, you know, see that and latch onto it. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. That's just what my life was. And that is also, you know, how I presented myself. So why wouldn't one want to come to Andre? But with Kevin, because we were so close, and he is such an exceptional human being. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Kevin. Way before I met Kevin, Kevin had traveled 7 continents. He speaks 7 languages fluently. He had command performances to the Pope in Vatican in the boys choir, command performance to the Queen of England. They were nominated for a Grammy Award, the Texas Boy Choir. He lived in the inner sanctum of the Dalai Lama when he was studying in India. So he's had an incredible life. So I was just, even with my education, perhaps being, my pedigree educationally wise was probably better than Kevin, but he was just such an exceptional human being. And I was just in awe of him as I am now. He has an IQ of 172. He's just a bright person. So that draws me to Kevin. And when he gets sick like this, when he first was diagnosed back in the 80s with HIV, because it was really scary back then, and everyone was sort of frightened of it because you were able to see the face of AIDS back in those days. People had Kaposi sarcoma and a whole lot of other opportunistic diseases and ailments that you could physically see. So you were walking around San Francisco, seeing people with hairy leukopenia and all these other types of things, sores on their face and various different other opportunistic infections. He never got any of that, but I'm sure he was aware of it because we spoke about it all. And at that time, they didn't have the cocktails at that time. But Kevin never, ever, not just with his illness, but just in life, he never, ever became depressed about it. Even today, Lorraine can tell you, and Amy and him too, when they've met Kevin is just such in a good mood all the time. I just don't know how he does it, given everything that he's been through over these past 20 years and with this HIV prior to the 20 years. So I'm just in awe and wish that I could be a little bit like that. But I have to say his illness, because there isn't anything definitive, and I'm not getting answers because the doctors don't have answers. This is the worst period in my entire life, and I'm almost 70 years old, where I have no control at all as to what. Give you an example of it that really illustrates it. My cell phone is always by my side. I take it to the bathroom. I take it to empty the trash can. I take it to cook, make dinner, to go run across the street to the store. I cannot be without that cell phone because I can get a call in any given second that Kevin is in crisis and Andre, you need to do something. Even though he lives in a nursing home, and one would think, well, he's in a nursing home. He's being taken care of. Why do you feel so compelled to be there with every nuance and every bit of my time spent toward Kevin? Because his system is so very fragile. Kevin gets ill and extremely ill with the drop of a hat. So I just say all that to say that I'm really not in a good space. And I don't know how to compartmentalize, and I don't want to be told to compartmentalize my emotions. I want to be immersed in doing what I can for him. He doesn't have any other advocates. And what I have found at the Sherrill House, where he is in a nursing home, they brought on some additional staff. And he does have a nurse there that treats Kevin the way that I would. He has a doctor there, Dr. Foreman from Beth Israel Hospital is the doctor that oversees all the patients. She's very proactive in Kevin's care. There's also a nurse practitioner there who's also very proactive. This is over the last 5 years. So I'm comforted by that. The least little thing that goes on with Kevin, they send him straight out to the hospital. So I want to say that's comforting, and it is, but I still have to come home at night alone and not sleep and worry again that I'm going to get a call in the middle of the night. And just imagine having to live your life like that for the last 20 years. So I'm taking Klonopin, and my internist prescribed to me a drug called, is it sertraline, Erin? Dr. Erin?
Yes.
Sertraline. Yes. Sertraline. She told me that this might calm me, but I didn't know just how it worked, and I would take them periodically. I didn't know it was something that it needed to build up in your system. So I'm in meeting with Amy and Dr. Irwin. They said, well, Andre, it's not a bad idea. Why don't you start taking that? Along with the Klonopin, because the Klonopin is a very low dosage, but I was on Klonopin before when I was in therapy, on the lowest dose of Klonopin, and I became addicted to it. I wasn't aware that I was addicted to it, but I was, because I tried to stop cold turkey one day on a trip. I took to New Orleans and I said, I'm not going to bring the Klonopin with me. And I didn't sleep for 4 days, and sleep deprivation was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. I didn't know that it was actually killing me cold turkey quitting on Klonopin. So I met with Dr. Irwin and Amy, and they told me about the sertraline. They told me about the Klonopin, and I've started taking those, and it's in my system now. It's a prophylactic type of approach to it. So I'm now able to sleep. I haven't slept like this, and it's a little scary too, to go to sleep at night and not to wake up until 8 o'clock in the morning. I haven't had that experience in quite some time. So I think that's helped. And so as much as I've been adverse to intervention by groups like this and intervention by therapists, I have found that, Andre, you don't have all the answers, even though, you're a biochemist and you have undergraduate work in physiology, and you know a lot about the physiology of the human being, but mentally, they have drugs out there that help. They surely do. I didn't want to admit to that, but I pleasantly have to say that Kevin's situation now, and it's even more bleak now with the cancer and the various things that he has going on, I need to be able to sleep at night. So if nothing else, And I don't think this is going to go well for Kevin. I really don't. I can sort of see the signs, or at least I'm having anxiety about the signs that somehow, and Amy said this to me, he's been sick with all these other things before, and there's been an ability by the medical medical teams to be able to address those things. Things like, you know, high blood pressure, or his seizures, or his HIV. There's medication out there that can control all of that. But this cancer thing is something new.
Yeah.
His immune system is so suppressed. That's sort of where I am with it now. I'm just, again, emotionally derailed during the daytime, but at nighttime I am able to sleep. And
you know, I'm so glad you can give yourself that that self-compassion.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, you know, we think about sort of like our basic needs as humans. And I think so often caregivers are faced with having to wait to go to the bathroom, or having to skip a meal, or having to like lose sleep. And so, you know, you're not often afforded the ability to have those basic needs.
Right.
I wanted to just ask a question of both of you, both Amy and Andre. And Amy, I know your time is a little more limited, so I'll ask you first, and then Andre after that. You know, and this is something we're going to talk about in our small groups today as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you wish other people understood, Amy, about caregiving?
That's a really, really good question. For me, it was that, you know, if we relate it to like a recovery context, it's like a non-linear process, you know, and it resonated with me when Andre was sharing about like just not being able to sleep and waiting for like that phone call in the middle of the night. Like you're in this constant state of hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm.
But I also noticed that people, and I understand why, because I've caught myself doing it to other people too, and then I get mad at myself for it. People would tiptoe around me, afraid to say the wrong things. And for me personally, what I wanted and what helped me the most was people who would talk about my mom, even when she was sick. People who would ask questions or want to hear the funny stories. You know, I have amazing friends who I told one funny story and they'll bring it up to this day, you know what I mean? And be able to reference my mom, because to me, that's what keeps her alive. And even when she was sick, you know, and she wasn't able to talk to me or she wasn't able to engage, it reminded me of my mom, of who she was, of the woman who raised me. So don't be afraid to talk to people, because sometimes that's, at least for me, that's what I needed the most.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy.
Of course.
Andre, what do you wish other people understood about long-term caregiving, or what do you wish they understood about caregivers?
That's an easy question for me.
Okay.
And it's unfortunate. I wish they understood, caregivers and the doctors and everyone within that group, that it's uncomfortable to engage Andre. And it's uncomfortable to engage me about Kevin is because I don't have any answers for Kevin. And my whole being is about getting a definitive response and answer to what's going to happen, the not knowing. And so when I'm engaged by others, I don't want the engagement to be about Kevin. I'm learning now that I would like for it to be more about me and not ask me how Kevin is doing. Even though I told Amy, she asked me a question once, how are you? I said, well, Kevin is fine today, so I'm fine. And that's what I really want people to understand, that as he goes and as he is well, I'm well. We have this symbiotic relationship that we've formed. And I want to be in my solitude in order to manage this and handle it, because there's no answers out there. So that's what it is for me. But I'm glad to be a part of this, because this is about Andre and not about, well, let me say this. I'm hoping to let you guys know that I want this to be more about Andre and not about Kevin.
Yeah. And I think that's
so powerful.
I think that's incredible, Andre, given like that, you know, we have been able to get to know you and that, you know, I have sort of said that to you at different times, like, you know, but really, how are you doing? I mean, that's like actually right in caregivers is like really get to the bottom of how they're feeling. And what I learned from working with you is that like sometimes that's where you are like you are really in a place where if Kevin is doing better, you are feeling better. And if you are able to sleep, you are feeling better. And, you know, it isn't so much about you identifying how you're really feeling because so much of that is connected to his care.
Sure. It's not an enviable position to be in, I tell you, but that is what it is. And I just, again, would like to reiterate how important it is for Andre to be in his solitude. That's the only way I can manage it. Lorraine, I'm already thinking that this is not going to go well. Is Lorraine still there?
I am. I'm here, Andre. Andre, I don't know, and I don't want to.
No. I don't want. I was about to say I'm not sure that this is going to go well.
Yes.
And
that is more correct, and I'll be truthful. I'm not sure either. It's concerning. I was concerned.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and I am, and you know what I was concerned about. I was concerned about you too, and how you were what you were gonna think, and how you were gonna take this.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty here right now.
Oh, yes. I mean, and I want to be angry at someone, but again, being a scientist from education, I know it's not, as I indicated, I know it's not an exact science medicine. So people can make predictions and say this, and then you get something totally different. And that's where we are with Kevin.
But that's also anger is a feeling and a feeling that people feel. That's human and understandable and, you know, important to acknowledge, you know, very, very important to be able to allow ourselves to have the feelings we have. There was one other question in the chat as we kind of prepare to transition to our breakout sessions about what we hope, like, you know, a therapist or psychiatrist might understand. You know, if you want to speak to this briefly, you know, that you don't need to be fixed. I think this is a really powerful statement.
Yeah, for sure. I think everybody around me was holding their breath. So I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I also live with a mental health diagnosis. So when everything happened with my mom and my grandmother, one after another, I could tell people were just holding their breath around me, you know, like waiting for me to, I don't know, whatever they thought up in their mind. Right. But they didn't treat everyone else like that.
Yeah.
So like, why am I different? You know? And so it almost set this like unspoken narrative of like, well, Amy's broken, so she's definitely gonna probably like go off the deep end. And thankfully for me, I'm an incredibly stubborn person. So if I see that happening, I'm going to prove people wrong. That's just it's one of my favorite hobbies, you know? But I'd be lying if I said it didn't impact me and it didn't hurt. And when you're already going through the pain and the grieving of being a caregiver, and then you have those outside influences, even though I'm sure it was with the best of intentions, right? They cared about me and they wanted me to be okay. It can still impact an individual. And so that's something I'd like people to always know.
Well, you know, what's interesting about that is I hear you say that, that's very interesting. And I was in that position as well. When I mentioned earlier that people would always come to Andre, I've been in a situation where I myself, a lot of my friends are MSWs and psychiatrists and psychologists, and I'm with them hanging out. This is an incident that happened. I'm hanging out with them, and I'm trying to connect with what you're saying here about maybe it's not about them as much as it is about the way that you and I present ourselves that makes them not want to respond in a certain way. We're all at the shopping mall with these MSWs and friends of mine and psychologists. And I'm saying, I stopped in the middle of our walking and I said, something's wrong. I'm feeling some anxiety here. I think I'm having an anxiety attack. And all these professional people with all their professional training, they look at me and say, did you eat today, Andre? I said, what do you mean? No, I didn't eat. Well, You having an anxiety attack? That's not who you are. You must have low blood sugar or something today like that. So they wouldn't even, the way that I present myself doesn't allow people to be comfortable around me if I break down. They always want to see me as this paragon of rectitude and strength, and they present themselves to me that way. So I had to take responsibility by saying, Andre, they treat you that way because that's how you present yourself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It reminds me of, one time we were giving a talk, I think Amy won't mind me sharing this story, that she was having a lot of anxiety, and, I'm like, just go out there and rock it, you're going to get through this, or, you don't have to. Either is okay. And I remember people coming up to me like, that talk was amazing.
Yeah.
She was so amazing, and I'm like, she's like, we're going to go throw up, but I mean, I think it's helpful to have someone who sees you, who calls you on it, who knows that, that's a part of your strength.
Yes.
And that they can both be true at the same time. So I'm always grateful for that.
Well, and what I said to her is, I wanted to run off the stage. And I didn't know what would happen if I ran off the stage. I thought, well, maybe Kelly will get up and give the talk. And she said, you didn't think I would come after you and make sure you're okay first? Let's talk about like really starting with where the person is instead of like just picking up and trying to pick up our professional duties. So yeah.
Absolutely. So this was really, really not
Thank
something that
so
I can
much.
do service to by a quick summary, and something we'll talk about more in our breakout groups. But I really want to thank Amy and Andre for sharing so honestly and being part of our community.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to do it more, so invite me, please.
Yeah,
we will. You're on the list now, Andre.
Okay.
Join the caregiving work group. I'm just going to quickly give you guys just a touch of framing. Amy, please feel free to jump in.
Amy, I know you have to.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see. I swear. So I think we heard a lot of these themes from Amy and Andre, that when we're caregiving, we're focusing first on the person we care for, and it's hard to think about ourselves. And we keep repeating it. We work, we caregive, we do it again. We're always responding to urgency. We don't know what to ask because the answer may not even matter. It's going to be on us regardless. We may not even identify as caregivers. And caregivers for people affected by mental illness and cancer are not the same as other caregivers. They may not always be spouses. They may be partners or children, parents, siblings, friends, community mental health staff, peer specialists, or clinicians. And Amy and I wanted to share just a few lessons learned from the caregivers who participated in our qualitative research. The first theme that emerged is to begin by meeting the person where he or she is. I wondered at the beginning if he really was processing it. I was waiting for him to yell, why me? Why is this happening to me? But with time, I thought maybe he's doing as much as he can within that disease to manage the problem. And I think just talking through it and validating the illness and saying that, okay, this is their strategy. This is how they deal with it. This is a hard one, to tend to your own needs. This is from a sibling. The thing I resisted most from the beginning, with everybody saying, you've got to take care of yourself. You won't be able to be there for the other person. I heard it over and over again. And just like that, it became incredibly true. When I got really sick myself, I had a lot of aches and pains, and I finally realized what stress was doing to my body. I wish that I had been more open to listening to that in the beginning. And that advocacy is needed to reduce mental health discrimination and improve communication. This is from a psychiatrist. I wish I had known that she wasn't getting good care. I wish I had been in a situation where I wasn't so overloaded myself and I could have been more attentive. I felt like I fell short with doing what doctors do, what doctors should do, but I was in a system that was completely overloaded and I couldn't. I felt like the story I was hearing was that they couldn't be bothered with this person. They thought she was too dirty to have radiation. So as we prepare to go into our breakout groups, we're going to go into 3 breakout groups, one for caregivers, one for clinicians, one for people identified primarily as having lived experience. These are some questions to think about
the first one, what would you most want other people and other roles to understand about your experience? And then just some thought questions. What do caregivers need? How and when can they take in information? What small steps can clinicians or other people take to support caregivers? How can we move in and out of that place of urgency that may chronically be in? And how can we recognize burnout in our colleagues and ourselves and be able to take action? So I'm going to go ahead and, sorry, I'm looking at my screen. We'll go ahead and put up the work groups, and you guys will be able to join the work group of your choice. And we'll come back together in about 20 minutes, 5 minutes. Because we're great. I think people will start to join us. There we go. This is still our group, but
yeah, they have like 60 seconds, so it should start appearing.
I think we're doing pretty well on time to have a kind of closeout discussion, and then we'll share the kind of upcoming work group meetings. Hassan, how did you hear about this group? If you're able to answer in the chat, I was just curious, from Sudan. That's wonderful that you joined us. I just wondered how you learned about the work. Maybe hard to respond, which is totally fine. Manny, hi.
Zoe, I had that on the second. Thank you all for sharing. Boom, we're back.
I was the same thing. I'm like, thank you all for sharing.
Welcome back. Appreciate everybody joining us. So we're just going to, summarize kind of the key lessons learned from the breakout groups, and then remind you guys of some upcoming events and opportunities to get involved in work groups. Does the lived experience group want to start? Rob?
Sorry. Oh, my mouth was full of food.
I'm sorry.
So we talked about the importance of peer support through the entire cancer treatment process, and also that caregiving doesn't necessarily mean family member or spouse or loved one. So we heard from Korea, who saw it. In a way, I guess we would consider that a professional caregiver, but the emotions and the skills and everything else are still the same. And we wanted providers to win our trust, that it's hard for us to trust people, and especially old school physicians who might not have had all the training in how to engage patients and how to be engaging. So we thought being able to engage individuals as people were important. And then finally, we talked about that many caregivers are also care recipients, and talked about the system being aware of when people, and Andre talked about it, people switch from those needing care to those giving care, and those roles switch back and forth a lot of times. So it's smart to check in on both the caregiver and the care recipient. I didn't like the word caretakers, guys, so I just changed it to care recipient.
Fair enough.
I use the term care sharer.
Cool. Yeah, Peter used care sharer.
But
I love that.
I think Manny, were you the one I was like, I'm also a caretaker?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I said that. It almost sounds like a movie, but I was with the flow. The caretaker, I don't know.
I mean, I think in the chat also what's coming up is the lack of representation of clinicians who look like us, or people in helping positions who look like us, who speak our language. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about, and Judith talked about, no Spanish-speaking therapist at Northwestern Hospital in Chicago, like the biggest academic tertiary medical center in that part of the country, and nobody spoke Spanish. No mental health professionals.
Yes.
And I just want to add, we also talked about the idea of caregiving. One of the participants had a question about whether or not they were a caregiver, and just kind of acknowledging that a caregiver is what we make it out to be. If you are providing care for somebody, you're providing resources, providing support. If you consider yourself a caregiver, then you very much are a caregiver. And Judith happens to be taking care of a group of women who without her wouldn't be receiving, resources or mental health or testing for cancer. So just acknowledging that there's a textbook definition for caregiving and what it means to be a caregiver, but in reality, if you identify as a caregiver, then that is what you are.
Yeah, I think that we're often more than one thing at the same time. We're taking action to help support people who are facing a hard time. And it does feel like, what exactly is your role sometimes? But I appreciate that, Kriya. Thank you. All right, how about the caregiver group?
Yeah, we had a terrific group. I think some of the things that came up were just around the lack of resources, that parents feel when they are, coping with a child with a mental illness who may be psychotic. Also kind of talking about how group home staff, community-based caregivers, how they feel when they are trying to be a caregiver in a hospital setting and are not feeling valued or not feeling like they can get any information at all. I know this is something that Kriya and I have talked about a number of times, and Marilyn, brought it up today in our group. It's just, something that has to really change on a systems level. That there is just so much care going on for individuals who don't have anyone else and who are being given excellent care in that setting. And then when that person, goes to the hospital, the staff don't have access. And it's just really a disservice to the patient, and it hurts the caregiver as well. We also talked about, Andre brought up a documentary that Oprah just released called The Color of Care. And we did talk about sort of, the connection on culturally responsive care for caregivers, and how caregivers often feel, caregivers who are Black or Latino or Asian may feel left out, or may not feel that they are being heard by staff. And Qian and Andre both spoke to that in our group. So it was really good. Did I miss anything? I know we had a really rich discussion. It just, as always, it just always flies by. Before I know it, I'm getting the break time, or the breakout room is over. So
I think I just add, Amy, and I think it's come through in a lot of today. It's just this idea of elevating the caregiver as a person that's not secondary, but somebody who's really crucial to helping the patient, but also they have their own individual needs and sometimes are a care recipient themselves. And just thinking about how on a systems level, we can elevate the caregivers and have them be seen and heard and get their needs met as well.
I think just building on that, in the clinician group, I think there was a lot of similar themes about how to create space for the caregiver, how to invite them into the room, ask what their name is, ask what they like to be called, let them know kind of where to put their stuff, create like physical space and emotional space, and then preparing for a transition, how important it is to help kind of teach caregivers do the things that they're going to need to do in the home, know how to de-access an IV or the port, like do the care and learn it together, even though that may take more time. One of the interesting things also is that there's this wish as clinicians for people to understand that we have stories too, that we're caregivers too, that we're patients too. that there's probably a common reason we're doing this work, and that sometimes it's hard to not share that story or to wonder if you might share that story, that there might be this lost opportunity for understanding, you know, and I think that and to me, that really speaks to the common wish for shared humanity that came out in all of the groups for all of us to be seen as people. I think also, you know, my group had a lot of nursing representation, just kind of this role of being at the bedside and not always being able to do what patients need you to do, having to say no a lot, but then also like all the stuff behind the scenes that happens to try to track people down, to try to get things to happen, all that advocacy. Sometimes I wish that patients knew what was happening to try to get people the care that they need. And, you know, a comment about kind of how sometimes we need to communicate in person or on the phone, that we can't email each other, that we need to, you know, remind each other that like, hey, we have the same thing we're worried about here. Let's figure out how we can figure it out. And, you know, I think much like Chen-Chi's saying in the chat, there's also the thought that sometimes caregivers are afraid to mention mental health needs if they may be viewed as incompetent or not able to care for the person, or there may be other layers of stigma, or if there's just no services. People don't want to screen if there's nothing we can do. So I think both of those issues are really important. You know, I think the clinician team wanted caregivers to know it is okay to ask the same question. We expect people to. that is a good sign, because, you know, it's hard to take in and absorb information, and we want to have that same conversation again and keep talking it through. And the same thing with like practicing tasks. There are other things I think I don't know if Erin or Lorraine, I tried my best to summarize.
Chen-Chi brought up the idea of the, I'm sorry, Lorraine, the idea of the non-casserole illness, which Jane brought up, that, you know, that a lot of times patients with cancer are receiving a lot of community-based support, and someone who's struggling with a mental illness is not necessarily getting that same outreach, and caregivers for that person aren't necessarily getting that, the support. You know, people stay away, or they don't know what to say. And so Jane used the expression, the non-casserole illness. So
love that. I love that. That's right.
Sorry, Lorraine, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's so true. These are virtual work groups. So I just wanted to quickly kind of summarize some of the action steps that our work groups are taking and invite you guys to join. So, you know, the clinical recovery work group has worked a lot on person-centered language, developing a language that's recommended for an ID card, and also thinking about cross-training across clinical role groups to help break down some of these barriers. So the leads of that, you saw Amy Sika, Dana Haggett is a nurse practitioner, was able to be here today, but definitely encourage you to join that group. I'm part of that group too. It's great. Korea is too. It's a good group. The caregiving work group has been really active. You know, recently had an event to kind of really listen, a listening session for caregivers, and this event is moving forward with research. And you see Carrie and Amy and Cameron here. That they have an upcoming meeting on June 8th at 7.
And Anna's
well. Thank you. And then Rob is here from the research work group, you know, and really brings together a diverse group of investigators. And, you know, like we're all like, you know, you can consider yourself a researcher. Not many of us are working researchers in different ways, or partners in research, to really think about what questions we need to ask. How do we better include this population in research? Also like our ongoing clinical trials and next steps to kind of provide funding to sustain this work. All virtual. You know, I mean, I think I just wanted to end by thanking you for being here, you know, and just like, I think that a lot of you may have seen our website, but if you haven't, like one of the things we ask you to do is just to take a shared pledge. So I thought maybe I would just put that up for all of us just as we end, because I think like it's really true, you know, and I think we could extend this for caregiving too. So we can go ahead and, you know, if you want to say it out loud or silently, I pledge to ensure that mental illness is never a barrier to cancer care. I just want to thank you guys all for being here, and invite you to, you know, reach out to me or Amy Corbeline if there are any questions or concerns.
Thank you all so much.
2 days in a row, Jane. Lucky me. Hopefully we get to have an art auction soon, you know, and we had such reach. We had people from Ireland and Sudan in this meeting. That's the reach of virtual events, in addition to like wonderful representation locally. So I appreciate everyone's involvement.
All right, everyone have a great weekend.
Bye.